This
have any fear
conference
in
will
this
now
stuff,
be
though,
recorded.
we need to make sure that we keep standing by our values and have that integrity and not be afraid to stand up for what we believe in, because we've done it far too long and look where it's gotten us.
Right.
And we do need to, the other important thing is, and I know maybe this subject, digging into the Constitution for everyone is a little dry, but we do need to stick together. And when we find like-minded people, stand together and make friends. And we may not always agree on everything we're standing up together for, but we do need to make sure we're collaborating and working together as well, and holding each other up when we have bad days. Right, Michelle? Anyway,
All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think everybody heard that I started the recording a minute or two ago. So today we're covering Articles 4, 5, 6, and 7 of the Constitution. And while that may sound scary, don't be scared. They're quite short today. So we have light reading, but some good material. Again, fascinating how much information, how much of a framework was put in place with so few words. So we'll get to that shortly. My clicker's not working. There we go. Like we talk about every time, guidelines are pretty simple. Everybody here is a veteran of the club, so comment, a comment or a raised hand. We'll do our best to pay attention to the raised hands. I know we were a moderator short last week, and I was having a hard time with the hands, but we'll do the best we can to give everybody a chance to share their piece. And like I said, today our material is a little on the short side, so we have plenty of time for conversation, which is why we didn't rush.
I got you this week.
Yeah, thanks. So Freedom Reading Hall is being hosted, or at least the videos are being hosted on the Illinois Freedom Alliance website. So if anybody wants to go there to check them out after the meetings, or if they can't make it to the meeting, and then we are sponsored by them as well. So there's a QR code there, or you can just go to IllinoisFreedomAlliance.us to their website and check out those videos. And if you feel so inclined, maybe provide them some financial support. I know as a grassroots organization, sometimes just keeping the doors open is tough. So we do all need to stick together. So starting with Article 4. Article 4 is states, citizenship, and new states. So we have just 4 sections, and they're all quite short. So Section 1, full faith and credit shall be given in each state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state. And the Congress may, by general laws, prescribe the manner in which such acts, records, and proceedings shall be proved, and the effect thereof. So that's it for Section 1. We have Section 2. The citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states. A person charged in any state with treason, felony, or other crime, who shall flee from justice and be found in another state, shall, on demand of the executive authority of the state from which he fled, be delivered up to be removed to the state having jurisdiction of the crime. No person held in service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. Section 3, new states may be admitted by the Congress into this union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, nor any state be formed by the junction of 2 or more states or parts of states without the consent of the legislatures of the states concerned, as well as of the Congress. The Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States, and nothing in this Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or of any particular state. And then section 4, the United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion, and on application of the legislature or of the executive when the legislature cannot be convened, against domestic violence. So that's it. So Article 4. Anybody have any comments before I go into some questions? There's not a lot of words, but a lot of good stuff in there.
I guess we're ignoring the invasion part.
We are ignoring much of the Constitution currently, but yes, the invasion part would be one of those things. Right, that's just, I keep saying it, I know, it's probably getting old, but it's just fascinating to me that almost 250 years ago, they can write a document and it can apply so directly to what's going on today. So I'll start with a question. What is meant by full faith and credit shall be given in each state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state? Any thoughts? That's almost all of section 1. No thoughts? All right, I'll continue on. So basically,
well, I was
that's
just going to
saying,
say,
go
sorry.
ahead.
I was just going to say that each state has to respect the laws of the other states.
Right.
Kind of
All
like
right,
that.
very good. That's exactly what I wrote there. So yes, that's exactly it. So we have to, you know, in one state, you don't get to ignore or disparage the laws of another state and or provide shelter from a person escaping the laws of another state. And then it indicates that Congress will define how laws from one state to another take effect or apply to one another. And then that ties into the next question, which the first part of section 2 describes a concept. So I was trying to ask here, what common name do we use for the concept that's described in section 2 of Article 4? Talkative bunch today. All right, so it's basically we're talking about extradition. So interstate extradition. I know often in the news, at least, we talk about extradition like being a country-to-country thing, but there's an interstate a rendition of that as well. And basically, it sort of ties to section 1. Each state has to respect the laws of the other states, and to that extent and in that regard, there's some. Reflected on my childhood. I remember watching things like Dukes of Hazzard, where you'd watch Bo and Luke Duke running from the cops, and they like race across the county line and then just screech to a stop, because once they got across the county line, there was no jurisdiction over there and they couldn't do anything, so they couldn't chase after them. So it's kind of that concept, and of course that was a comedic rendition of the idea, but it's that sort of idea. If I rob a bank in Illinois and then I run to Indiana, I still broke the law, and Indiana will respect the fact that I broke the law in Illinois. So if Illinois says, hey, Ken Sicko's in your state and we need him back because he broke the law here, they'll collect him up, because Illinois doesn't, even the state police, they don't have jurisdiction or authority to go into Indiana to collect me. So this, that whole idea rolls all the way back to the Constitution, and in just a couple sentences they cover how that happens. All they have to do is, state of Illinois says, hey, state of Indiana, find Ken and bring him to us, and they do.
Hey, Rochelle mentioned sanctuary cities, so obviously we see what happens, like in the summer of 2020, what happened with the sanctuary cities. Doesn't seem like it's such a great idea, does it? allowing a whole bunch of people that are willing to commit crimes and be violent and burn the house down when they don't get their way. You basically give them all a place to come to, and we can see what happens when that occurs. Seems like not a great idea. Seems like a
Right.
bad idea.
The other thing that's ironic is in most cases, sanctuary cities are really, a state providing shelter from a federal regulation, which really is unconstitutional. And we'll get into a little more of why in a short while here. But that's why that concept and the execution of sanctuary cities is such a big deal for many people. There really is an unconstitutional practice, but it demonstrates the fact that, the, whatever you want to call it, the uniparty, the deep state, the corruption is so pervasive that we're, just like we already said, we're not really following the Constitution. We're not enforcing it. We're just letting things slide. And so when people talk about, hey, it feels like we're living in a lawless state, we really are. And that's why, organizations like New Illinois and organizations like the Convention of States that are really just trying to bring us back to enforcing and protecting the Constitution are so important. I know you have some other material, Jody. Am I in the zone yet for some of your other
Right.
input, or
Well,
a little farther?
there's somebody we've met through this whole experience that we see on a regular basis, and he comes back to Article 4 repeatedly, because in the news, we keep hearing this banter between, I'm going to stop saying Democrats and Republicans, but progressives and conservatives. And so this idea about we're democratic, we're democracy, in Article 4, it states the U.S. what?
Right.
The U.S. guarantees that every state in this union will guarantee a Republican form of government. There's nothing about a democracy in here. And I think that the progressives, the radicals in our country want us to believe it's not a Republican, but it's in our U.S. Constitution.
Right.
Ultimately. And I don't know, you're getting to, I have some notes here about the protecting.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, we'll bounce back and forth. So section, hold on, is it section 3? Oops.
Oh,
sorry, I was
Went
on
off
the
the
wrong mouse, so I gotta get back to where I was. All right. So yeah, section 3 is talks about new states and whether a new state can be formed from an existing state, or if an existing state essentially be made into two states. So that is essentially what New Illinois is all about. So a new state can be created from an existing state, but it requires the consent of the legislature, the state legislature, and of Congress. So I don't know if anybody here is involved in New Illinois. I don't think so from who's here, but essentially what that idea is that if we could gain enough support across enough counties so that we could then turn to our legislature and inspire the vote we would need for them to agree. Their vision is that we would turn this current state of Illinois into two states, one which would be maybe just Chicago, or maybe Chicago and suburban Cook County, and then all the rest would be a separate state that, at this point they're calling New Illinois, but effectively West Virginia was created this way. But the idea is that, the demographic and the the cultural perspectives of the people certainly in Chicago and like in Central Illinois are so disparate that it's unreasonable and impractical to decide that, they should act as a single body and have one legislature, because decisions can't be made that are beneficial to people who live in Chicago and beneficial to people who live in rural Illinois. So that's the foundation of splitting them apart. And then it's just about getting the support necessary. So again, just one paragraph that builds the entire framework for that to happen. And so that's what that organization, when you run into somebody, and they're in a lot of the events that we all tend to hang out at. So, and I think I know the Convention of States, which is something that Tim and Bill Roth from Warriors are a part of. That's a little different. That's about essentially calling a gathering of states that can enact parts of the Constitution without Congress agreeing, because we'll talk about that shortly too. But effectively, if you have enough of a majority of the states acting together, they can work as a governmental body separate from the branches of government. Everybody have any thoughts about that? Anybody do any digging on New Illinois?
Tim,
Well, I think
No,
there's
but
a
I think
connection
we
made
call it
turning
freedom.
DC into a state. And that you can see how DC could become a state, but I don't think it should. There needs to be some type of area, it should be the seat of the entire federal government, that needs to be, its own entity, a district as we have it, rather than an actual state. Just
Well,
to
it
keep
is its
things
own
kind of even
entity.
Steven.
Because I was just looking, that's my question, is how does DC fall under the Constitution? Because I don't think they actually address it.
Right, they may not. I know that is a running conversation about what is DC exactly, and is it part of the country or isn't it? And I know there's a number of.
I don't think it is, and I think that's how they get away with the whole J6ers. Because those J6ers have no constitutional rights. And they're
Right.
within the 10 square
Right.
miles of
Right,
the
so
District
that's
of
why they're
Columbia.
keeping them in the DC gulag instead of letting them go to another prison
Correct.
somewhere else.
Correct. It's like they're on a foreign soil. That's why they have no rights. My personal opinion. I think that's why that's happening the way that it is.
Right. I understand that, and it's interesting because I don't feel like I've heard anybody talk about that directly, but that would make sense because it doesn't
there
feel
I am.
like DC is a part of. Doesn't feel like DC is part of the country. It's like we said, a separate entity.
Right. I mean, they have no voting power in
Right.
Congress and Senate. They have
Right, which
representation, but no voting
They're trying
power.
to change that, but they haven't been able to yet. So that's good.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, it was specifically set up that way so they couldn't influence Congress in their own behalf.
Right.
right.
And then I'll just throw this one in there because I know it's sort of repeating what Jody was speaking to. I know she has some other material, but this is the critical purpose of Article 4, Section 4 is just that guaranteeing every state in the union a Republican form of government, like she said.
Right. So it's very important to remember that as it relates to our Constitution. And when people argue that we're a democracy, I would just point to Article 4 and remind them that that's not so. You can say it as much as you want, but our Constitution guarantees a Republican form of government.
And the liberals refer to it all the time as a democracy, every chance they get, because that's what they're shooting for, and then essentially shooting then for communism. So democracy means that they're voting for what they want, right? And the republic means that we hire them to vote for what we want. And they keep forgetting that.
Right. So the bullet points that define a Republican form of government are power of the government is held by the people. I got to close the door to Dr. Sultan. And people give the power to the leaders by voting for them. So essentially consent of the governed. And then those representatives are responsible for enacting laws and protecting the entire population, not just a portion of them.
I don't know how many of you guys read it or just saw we discuss it and participate. But in reading through this, all I kept thinking about was January 6th and this whole area of our Constitution just feels like it's being challenged by the pure essence of that whole event and its lingering nature and the, I guess, I don't know where everybody is at on January 6th, but feeling like, we the people, like people in general, had a very, it was definitely an exercise in how much the media could steer a country, an entire country's opinion about what they believed they saw happening. And it's interesting just talking about Tucker Carlson a little bit and the fact that this last week he came out and said, oh, I have the rest of the footage. And just in the tiniest bit that he shared, you can see that just in a little bit that we didn't see everything, that the way the media spun that event off of the little bit of material, they put pieces together to tell you a story about January 6th. And most of America accepted what they put together to show us versus what really happened. And, I think basically to steer us in a certain direction, but there's a lot of violations of our Constitution as it relates to that particular day, I believe.
Something I finally understood about the French Revolution. I don't know if I didn't catch on in 10th grade in European studies or if my teacher didn't do a good job, but I always thought, why did they storm the Bastille? Why let out these crummy robbers? And then after seeing the January 6th, I'm like, oh, I don't think they were crummy robbers. They were people who were against the king.
A tyrant.
Right,
They had to take those people out.
being unjustly detained.
Right?
Mhm.
Right, that's all
Exactly.
I got. I don't have any
So-
more on Article 4.
One other excerpt I wanted to read is interesting. It's from actually the Cornell School of Law talking about what a Republican government is, and they're actually citing what the Supreme Court has said. And the Supreme Court, they acknowledge that the Supreme Court has avoided addressing what the definition of a Republican form of government is because it gets confusing and gets into what's referred to as a guarantee clause. But they have gone on to define that a republic at least may bestow a name on a government which derives all of its powers directly or indirectly from the great body of the people. And it is administered by persons holding their office during pleasure for a limited period or during good behavior. It is essential to such a government that it be derived from the great body of the society and not a favored class of it. So when we have less political and more societal conversations about the elites and their control of everything, including our government, it is definitely a deviation from this Republican form. They're shifting into a place that's more like the feudal system where there's families of power as opposed to the will of the people, defining who is awarded that power to execute our will.
I mean, for example, I think we brought this up before. This is the first year in 57 years that we don't have a Bush, a Clinton, or I think a McCain in the top 3 positions of power.
Right, that's amazing.
57 years.
That's pretty amazing. It also feels like that may explain their panic or the panicked behavior, erratic behavior we're experiencing from our government. That allows them control, right?
But even from those other families, you see their kind of what do you call it? Heraldry, I believe you call it heraldry, as far as, you know, the king, the queen, and all the other people beneath them. Is
Mhm.
they all run around like they're little dukes and duchesses and barons. It's horrible.
Well, for them, it's all about bloodlines. Always has been.
It's interesting today, speaking of bloodlines. So this gentleman that we meet that's very, very astute on our Constitution, and we saw him actually at Luau today, and he made a comment about how the royal, essentially the royals of the United Kingdom believe they're the descendants of Adam, and that they project that as part of their, as part of the early part of our Revolutionary War and the conflict between our forefathers and the crown. The crown, projected that, and I think it's kind of interesting that there's a lot of content coming out that it's actually the contrary of that, or they throw that out there because it keeps us from having the conversation, which is sort of their tactic, right? So,
Yeah, I'm thinking
Right,
more
that brings you back to
king
that
or
idea of the divine right of kings, where they believe they're, despite the fact that they're not Christian in any way or God fearing, they behave like their authority is given to them by God.
we have a few comments here. I don't want to skip over them.
Right,
Kira, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Kira asked if Hillary is behind the scenes somewhere pulling the strings. It's hard to say. It depends on who you ask. Some people say she's dead already. But
yeah, I think it goes
Yeah.
way higher than her.
if she's not, then I'm sure she's involved in the group that are gathering in Obama's basement, pulling Biden's strings, because he clearly is not cognitive. So somebody's telling him what to do, and he's doing a terrible job of following instructions.
I saw something
Or is he?
today.
Or is look like a bumbling idiot, part of the instructions.
Well,
Yeah.
I saw something in one of my threads. I follow a group of people on Twitter that I don't know who they are, but they act like they know an awful lot. And they were talking, there was a thread about Hillary Clinton and her father and her family. And I don't know, Michelle, maybe you know something about her like it ties back actually to the mob in Chicago. Her
Whose
dad,
father?
Hillary's father, Rodham.
Hillary's?
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard that, but anyway, I saw
I
that.
have heard that, but I haven't really gone that rabbit hole.
Ah, something for tonight.
So everything comes back to Chicago mob, doesn't it? All of this.
A lot does. Should we go on to Article 5?
Sure.
All right. Article 5 is amendments. The amendment process. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendments which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect effect the first and fourth clauses in the 9th section of the first article, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. So that's it. So interesting. Again, this is reiterating the Convention of States, that concept again, that essentially when 2/3 of both houses decide it's time to make a change, that they can enact, begin writing an amendment and begin the approval process, or when 2/3 of the states decide they want to convene a convention of states, so they can, again, the states have the opportunity to work separate from Congress, so that, again, following this concept that this is all power derived from the people. So if Congress isn't doing what we need them to do, there are tools at our disposal to sort of grab the ball and run with it. We don't have to sit there frustrated going, darn it, we need this change, but Congress won't do it. And then I just threw in the definition there. Suffrage of the Senate is their right to vote. So so that these changes can be made, but in every case, looking at some interpretations of this article, it's essentially saying that no state can be deprived its opportunity to vote on the matter. So it's interesting. As a side to that, in some of the early days, there was so much confusion as people were trying to get their ducks in a row and figure out their legislatures. There were things like voting George Washington into his first presidential term, that 3 states didn't even participate because one couldn't figure out how to allocate their legislature and 2 couldn't get there. So we reflect on what they're dealing with and try to relate to what their life was like, and there's just some of the simple logistics of life that we just can't relate to, that they had to overcome on top of creating a new nation. Oh, thank you, Rochelle, for letting us know who the guest is. So we have Rob on as a guest. So it's just one paragraph. So that's the only question I have for Article 5. I don't know if you had anything more on that, or if anybody else has any more comments, Jody or the rest.
Well, just reiterating the whole protecting individual freedom from unreasonable detention as opposed to protecting personal safety. Again, that concept seems to what's going on with January 6th? I mean, I think of Article 5 and I think of just some of the deeper ideas there. And we're not really achieving that right at this point.
Right.
They need to be I find it interesting recently, Trump has been kind of pushing this more assertively, the idea that they need to be released. Just need to be released. I mean, it's ridiculous. I was saying release them almost immediately, but it's 2 years. For some of them, they've literally they've been in jail for 2 years. I don't know a lot about.
At least that's what they would have us believe.
Right, but I think of, we'll call him the shaman guy, Jake Chansley, whatever, and I've read all early on. Ken and I were on top of January 6th, on January 6th. Yeah. So we were going down rabbit holes, and if we have enough time, there's a video that we actually saved that was released on January 7th. We saw the video on January 7th, I think.
No, this 21-minute one, it took a little longer than that.
It did, but we were
about 2
looking at, Ken and I were being weirdos. I'll just admit we were being weirdos.
We saw the pieces.
Right, and we were watching the videos and we kind of like, at the time, I don't know what happened to our memory stick, but we were saving the videos and like watching them slowly and replaying them, because it just wasn't making sense. And I had a friend who was there and she was communicating with me. I knew she was going. We had debated about going and decided not to. Actually, some of us, Chris, Michelle, there's a gentleman that Roger Fuller, who was there that day. So we have a few people that we could rely on for their personal firsthand experiences. And so there were things that were coming back to us that weren't adding up. Like my friend explaining, it was like outside of, and we've heard this before from other people along the way, it was like the best day of her life, like the most, she felt so like unified with people and surrounded by love and support and the American ideals and unity and a lot of things. And they had been there, I think, 2 days by the time Trump came to speak. And she was sort of reporting back to me. So he spoke, his speech was delayed. He was delayed that day. So there are a lot of things that seemed odd about the day. But she shared some footage with me, and I don't know if I can get that off my phone and send it, of a gentleman that was literally there in the crowd at the Capitol all day instead of listening to Trump. And he explained they were just there peacefully, peacefully protesting about the vote. And I think it was when they started getting to the second, I don't know where they were, but the Capitol Police began shooting rubber bullets into the crowd at people and tear gas. At the time they hadn't breached the Capitol yet. So there were things that don't really make a lot of sense. But I do find Article 5 a strange piece of the Constitution. Who was that?
That was
Somebody
me by
talking or
accident.
somebody just playing something?
Yeah, that was me by accident.
Oh, okay.
All right. Anyway, I'm rambling. Sorry.
All right. Yeah. Let's move on to, we can go on to J6. So Jordy's letting the cat out of the bag. We're planning on doing J6 on the afterwards. So as you can tell, we're doing some brushing up on that material, which is all very frustrating. So, so Article 6, I'll read 6. So Article 6 is debts, supremacy, oaths, and religious tests. All debts contracted and engagements entered into before the adoption of this Constitution shall be as valid against the United States under this Constitution as under the Confederation. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. The senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, but no religious test shall ever be required as to qualification to any office or public trust under the United States.
Wait, did we have a test of religion or something under the Articles of Confederation? Like, did I just totally miss that?
No, I don't think we did. I think the point was just making the point. And this ties really into the reality behind the concept of the separation of church and state, and the fact that the intent was that there was no, requirement, no official religion for our country. So there was no questioning of your religious beliefs or potential disqualification for a position because of your religious beliefs. So they just wanted to make sure that was a part of the document.
Yeah, I'm kind of regretting that part now. Like, I sort of wish they had put in some minimums.
Right. It does feel like some minimums might have been good, but that unfortunately gets into, how do you
We would have
have
just lied
freedom
about that too.
and how do you have freedoms and restrictions at the same time? It's a very dicey situation.
Right, and I
They would've just
agree
lied.
with you. Right, Rochelle, I agree with you in the sense that it feels like one country under God, right? So we think of our Declaration of Independence, and you think that, okay, but then they don't have a religious test as it relates to that oath, so they don't have to swear particularly. They can choose. So there's like a fine line in how do you get to that freedom and sovereignty piece and include God in the conversation. So I'm guessing they had to make that choice and figure out which was more important. And so
Right. And nowadays we have the problem too, where people get confused between freedoms and feelings. So while I am free to believe in God and Jesus Christ, and I guess if you're so inclined, you're free to pray to worship Satan if you'd like, or believe in nothing if you like. That doesn't mean you get to tell me I'm not allowed to express my beliefs because they offend you. That's where things get very muddy.
well, it's a slippery slope, and like Kara mentioned, that at the time, we have to think that at the time all beliefs were essentially Christian, at least of our forefathers, Quaker, Catholic, Protestant. It was never intended, they never understood or believed, could foresee that it would be non-Christian beliefs, perhaps. So maybe that's why. I don't know.
Right. No, I think that's true, but here we are in the state of Illinois, where every year we have a Baphomet on display for Christmas because they've decided that in some way that makes sense and is fair, despite the fact that Christmas is a Christian holiday. So, oh, interesting. So Kira's explaining that there's a book about Thomas Jefferson and the Tripoli pirates that gives more insight. Do you know the title for that book? Or if you could share a link with us, we could send it out to everybody. So the Supremacy Clause is this statement that the Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made pursuant thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land. This is an important statement, and the point about our Constitution being the ultimate ruling, point of rule, point of law, and it is sort of the underlying missing piece each time we're talking about one of these articles, one of these sections, and we go, hey, how come we're not following that right now? There isn't a reason why we're not following it. And this sort of reiterates the idea that, our frustration that we're sharing in that moment, it is the supreme law of the land. And not only is it the supreme law, but in this one paragraph, it's indicating that, the judges in every state are bound by it, and that the states are not allowed to write laws that are contrary to it. So this brings us back to the idea of a, what do you call it? I forgot the term now, sanctuary city. A sanctuary city is a violation of the Constitution without question. It's written right here. But again, we're in a place where enforcing the law is becoming very complicated because I don't know why exactly. we're catering to corruption first.
Because it's too hard to do the right thing.
Apparently.
Well, and it sort of just goes back to human nature, obviously. And it's sort of a lesson we always taught our children, Ken and I did, that the right road is usually the hard road. The easy road generally isn't the right road, right? So it's sort of ties into that. Sorry, Ken.
No,
But
that's
I mean,
fine.
if we can send in the troops in our own states to, like, we turn the army on the KKK, you know, like we've done it before, where if somebody's out of line, that, like, why can't we turn the army onto the sanctuary cities?
Well, that gets a little tricky. So, like, we talked about it. Where do we talk about it? We just talked about it. Let me back up. That was, I guess that was in Article 4. So, every state's guaranteed a Republican form of government, and the United States shall protect each of them against invasion and on application of the legislature against domestic violence. So that's that whole thing. You know, we had the George Floyd riots going on in the summer of 2020, and everybody is yelling, "Oh, Portland's burning down. Seattle's got a demilitarized zone in the middle of the city. Why isn't Trump just sending in the troops?" Well, that's not the way the system's set up. Each state is responsible for its own security unless it turns to the federal government and says, "Hey, I need help." The president isn't really authorized to just send troops in.
You got to think of it
So,
like police municipalities, like the police. The FBI just can't go in and take jurisdiction over a case. They have to invite the FBI in. So it's kind of a similar type of thing.
right,
So the governors have to ask for federal assistance.
right. So that's where we run into storylines like the demilitarized zone in Seattle, or you got Lori Lightfoot on TV saying if Trump sends the National Guard here, the Chicago police will be arresting them. It's like, what? That doesn't
Well,
make any sense.
I have a theory too. And again, like if you go back to the art of the deal in Trump, and I know he's not working alone. I don't want to put him on that great of a pedestal. I think he has people around him helping him make decisions. So the summer of 2020, I felt like was interesting. At first, I was perplexed by why was he pushing back, particularly with COVID. I was like, what is going on? He's literally pushing back on the states to make their own decisions, right? He says, I'm going to send you the help you need. And it rolls into all this. I'm going to send you all the, what were the COVID, the machines, the
Ventilators.
Ventilators.
So I'm going to send you a whole bunch of ventilators and send them the help they need, but putting the decision back on the state, because honestly, I don't know where you guys are at, but man, I woke up like nobody's business on how corrupt some of our states were, our governors. It showed me some of these governors and like how purely evil and how inhumane many of their decisions really were. It wasn't exposed for me. And then we rolled into the summer of like everything's to the ground. And then it showed me like, again, more of the way each state's governors were making decisions and how like diametrically opposed some things were, like in Minneapolis and Portland, and even Milwaukee, or not Milwaukee, Racine, right? Isn't that where
Kenosha.
Kenosha, sorry.
Rittenhouse.
Right, exactly. And so it demonstrated like when you put the power back into the states and give them the rights to make decision, it really revealed that if Trump would have like rescued those cities, if he would have stepped in, we would have seen less. I think we would have not actually seen what we needed to see in order to be where we are today, as hard and true as it was. So that's just my,
Right.
my
And there's a bit of a double-edged sword there, that things were out of control. So if somewhere along the line, Trump would have decided, okay, Seattle has a hole in the middle of the city where the police can't even go. We need to send the military in. There were people getting hurt, buildings getting destroyed. Trump would have been blamed for all of that if he sent anybody in. No matter if it happened before they sent him in or not, he still would have been blamed for all of it. Now he's still blamed for not sending people in. But
right.
the laws, the way they're written, are, he can use that as his defense for his decision making. He really wasn't entitled. He didn't have the authority to just make a decision to send the army in. So, and that's an important piece of what's missing in the government right now. The administration that's in power right now has no regard for what authority that they have or what they're entitled to do by the laws that are currently written. They're just making decisions and imposing rules, sometimes as an executive order, sometimes just as some kind of vague policy that they never really get on paper, but the whole world changes as a consequence of it. We're dealing with vax mandates. Biden said, oh, we're going to do the vax mandate. All you corporations better start doing it. So they did. And then they figured out that a vax mandate would be unconstitutional, so they never did it as a federal law. But all these corporations are going, crap, now we got, 30, 100, 1,000 people who we've made take the vax. How do we stop making them take the vax? I guess we don't. We'll just keep doing that. Okay, here we go. And that's where we're stuck because we don't have any real leadership.
I think though too, that's where Trump is good with the art of the deal. Like he's so good about putting people out in front and letting them just sink themselves. You know what I mean? Like look what he did with Fauci. He put him front and center and he let him just sink himself and now it's all coming out, right? And he didn't stop him because it wasn't his place to stop him. He was the quote unquote expert. Now it's all coming out that he was being played by the people that were in the government, in the
Right.
private sector that were, giving him the information and guiding him. So I think that's all part of the art of the deal. Like he's putting them all front and center, Cuomo, Pritzker, just letting them all sink themselves.
Right. So I find that interesting. So Cuomo, like, look what happened to him. I mean, some of them, they kind of sunk themselves pretty quickly. And maybe even the thing they were like, I definitely have hard feelings about what happened in New York with the people in the nursing homes. My gosh, what a tragedy. And what takes Cuomo out? His sexual harassment of the women he's working with. So that's a bit perplexing. I feel like there's a little confusion for me left on that one. But you're right, Trump just sort of lets them expose themselves. Gretchen Whitmer is another one in Michigan where like we've seen a little bit already, and I don't know if we'll see more about the fact that kidnapping was all staged again by a 3-letter agency. Good grief. I mean, it's
Probably the same people from J6.
Probably.
Right, but I mean, she was exposed as being just this complete tyrant and psychopath, and yet she got reelected, which just killed me. I couldn't
she
believe.
didn't.
I was like, "How?"
I
No, she
remember
She selected.
was selected.
right. She's selected, not elected. That's how it's happening. We're supposed to be paying attention to those details.
Right. She's
Yes,
selected
okay.
for sure.
Yeah. It's
So
crazy.
the other question I had here was the thing that Rochelle asked about right away, the prohibiting members of certain religious denominations from being president of the United States. And so no, there's no religious test for any office, any public office. And but I, certainly back to that, I think that whole idea of context is important, and I think we're probably on the money. No one thought of somebody worshiping Satan and then becoming president. That wasn't a thing. It wasn't the way people behaved, and certainly not the people in this country. The people, many of the people coming to America were seeking religious freedom because they were believers, not because they were disbelievers.
I think we need to make this an amendment.
We're going to add religious tests.
Yeah, they actually have to, prove that they follow Christianity. So we don't get a
Well, there was
Satanist
a
in there.
grand
Another
jury
one.
witness. There was a grand jury witness in a recent case who was an idiot and spoke after the whatever, and she was talking about being sworn in on a popsicle stick. And it just made me sick. I just got nauseous. I was like, this is so out of control. Like, what's the
Not
point
that
of
girl
even
from
swearing
Georgia.
people in? Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a technical grand jury. They're going to do a do-over with a real grand jury. It was an investigative grand jury, whatever. But the point is like you're swearing people in on a popsicle stick, like, or why not a doorknob? I mean, what is the point of even taking an oath anymore? Or, I mean, if it means nothing to these people, then it's just a pointless ritual.
So what was the point of the popsicle stick? Have they taken the Bible away because it's offensive to some people?
No, because these idiots had a little ice cream party with the DAs before their.
Oh,
It's just the whole thing is nonsense. But my point was just that, like, what is the point of an oath if these people have no religious convictions?
Well,
right.
separately, it's not even about, I mean, it is about religion, but are they mocking our Constitution? Seriously. I mean, it feels like they're turning our Constitution into mockery. Like, look at me go. I could care less about,
Which is
Right.
why I'm saying we need an amendment to that.
right?
Right. It does become a fundamental problem in having a conversation about a set of documents that are written on the precept of God-given rights and authorities and natural law, and then dealing with a society where there's a serious effort to basically destroy the belief in God. How do those two things work together? Just, it doesn't feel possible. So, all right, sorry. So let's wrap up. Article 7, very short. The ratification of the conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states so ratifying the same. That's it. So, and what is ratification? Simply signing something to give formal consent. So essentially the same as signing a contract or an agreement. So they signed the Constitution, and it was so.
Right, but I feel like I'm trying to look at my notes here. It wasn't ratified until 1788, though.
Correct.
And then it was operative, or it was put in operation in 1789. I just have key notes here that I put down. We, the people, affirm that the government of the U.S. exists solely to serve its citizens. Interesting how they've managed to flip it on us. We're serving them.
Right. Anybody else with any insights? All right. So this is why we did the little bit of legwork, so we had something to talk about. Short material this week, but still important, and the foundation for the amendments, which we'll talk about, we're actually, so we've got the recording so far, weeks 1 through 5 are all up on the Freedom Reading Hall Book Club page, and we'll add this one, the next day or two. And just a reminder, if you've been watching, keeping an eye on the schedule that comes out along with the invites. Just got some breaks in there, so we're not doing this, every single Sunday and feeling like we're burning the candles at both ends. So next week will be a break week, so we won't have the reading club next Sunday. We'll reconvene on Sunday, March 26th, and we'll be covering the first 5 amendments of the Bill of Rights. So we'll talk about the Bill of Rights a little bit as a whole, and why they wrote the Constitution and the first 5 amendments immediately the way that they did, and then cover those amendments. So unless somebody has any more material about the Constitution itself, that will be an early end to the formal part of the book club. But like we said, we've got some afterward material to discuss and share related to January 6th. So if everybody has some time to hang around, that'd be great.
But you're gonna stop recording, right? So that.
Am I gonna?
I don't know. Do you think?
All right, so I'll stop recording before I share that video, but I was gonna have some conversation first. So if anybody has some thoughts, we had a busy week this week. For anybody who wasn't following along for the play-by-play on Monday of this week, Tucker Carlson, during his regular show, shared some video from January 6th, which now ridiculously is over 2 years old, and basically showed, he has many names, the QAnon shaman, bullhorn guy. His name is Jacob Chansley. He was the guy who was there with the bullhorns and a flag, and he was essentially shirtless and had a bunch of tattoos and face makeup, so he looked kind of like the American version of Braveheart, and he was walking around and sort of a key figure in everything you saw related to January 6th in the aftermath, and they made him out to be a violent, unstable, insurrectionist who led the charge against the Capitol. But on Monday, Tucker shared these videos that were, maybe 2 minutes of him just kind of shuffling around the halls of the Capitol, never with less than 2 police officers with him, and sometimes in the company of as many as 9 police officers, chatting, walking around, checking doors, looking around, basically on a personal tour of the Capitol building. In some cases, the police officers are opening or checking doors for him if they're unlocked, if he can take a look in a room or what have you. They're the ones who let him onto the floor of Congress. And in the released video on Monday, they include a portion where he essentially shares a prayer out loud, thanking God for the helpful and gracious attitudes of the Capitol Police, for allowing them to come into the building and keeping everybody safe. And there's nothing violent about it. There's no, it is clear that there was not altercations going on between him and the police. They were not trying to get him to leave, and he was difficult. He wasn't running. They weren't pursuing. It wasn't anything like what's been conveyed by mainstream media. So it was interesting, though, not because of that. That was some of the stuff that, like Jody said, we were watching and really, really devoted an inappropriate amount of time to trying to figure out
what was really going on, because nothing made sense from the beginning to us. But we had all these video clips and stuff, and the inconsistencies were weird, and nobody seemed to want the truth. So now this new piece of information comes out, and I don't know, because I was young and probably not paying very close attention, but I thought when I was a kid that my parents watched the news, and the people that they watched on the news, they held in high regard. They thought news people were they were truthful people with integrity and character, and that was a part of your job as a newscaster. So if you ever made a mistake, it was very important for you to issue corrections and that kind of thing. And so if somebody scooped a story, then other newscasters would be like rushing to the story and trying to figure out their little angle and the morsel of truth that they could share so that they could be part of the scoop too. But when Tucker shares this new piece of information, mainstream media didn't rush to the story to try to scoop their part of it. They all attacked Fox News. And then, of course, the Democrats in office attacked Fox News. And then there were, a dozen or so Republicans in office attacked Fox News. So nobody's demonstrating an interest in truth or even investigating inconsistencies. They just condemn a different narrative and accuse Fox News of what they called cherry picking bits of video from all kinds of video to convey the message they wanted to convey. And sadly, I don't think people understand that that's actually what the mainstream media did on January 7th and every day since then. They're the ones cherry picking, showing us those same scenes of police and the public fighting over the barricades outside, and that one guy walking around with the podium out of Nancy Pelosi's office, and one guy sitting on the ground with his eye bleeding because he got shot by a plastic bullet, and then one vestibule where there's just a mob in there and people pushing in and pushing out, and it looks chaotic, and some videos of people breaking windows, and they just keep showing that same footage over and over and over again, demonstrating how scary and how terrible it was. And you have stories from people like Chuck Schumer, how he ran for his life, and stories from people like AOC, who wasn't even there, talking about how she ran for her life. So it's just insanity. There's no place for us to turn for truth. So that being the case, we figured we'd dig into some of this. But before I show this video that we've talked about before, does anybody have any insights, anything that they saw or heard that was interesting to them, or any bits and pieces, morsels? We always like the morsels.
I like Tucker's report because I was sick with COVID and I was watching it live. And a lot of the things I saw was what Tucker saw or showed us, is the Capitol Police opening up doors and removing barricades and people walking peacefully through, always being respectful around the velvet ropes.
Right.
And then you saw, this was the live portion. And then an hour or two later, you just see the complete pandemonium, and that's all you see. You didn't see the actual live footage that broke as soon as the supposed insurrection started. And it needs to be said, this is the first insurrection in world history where no one had a weapon and no one had a plan.
Right. Right. There's two videos that we found. One, I think, might have been actually late at night, probably early the morning of the 7th, and one may have been a day or two before. But it was interesting. You had to pay attention to the details. The one video was of a policeman, supposedly. He wasn't a very physically fit policeman, but it's a young policeman who you see a view from behind of him seemingly struggling at a door to keep people out of that door, but he fails. And then he turns and kind of runs. And he runs up a set of stairs. And of course, the people who he didn't keep from coming through the door run after him. And he runs upstairs and runs into a room where there's already cameramen waiting, who then film this strange altercation between a couple of other policemen who are already up there also waiting, and the mob that comes into the room. And it's like, man, those cameramen were so lucky that they just happened to be standing there pointing at a doorway where an angry mob gushed in.
Right.
Good.
Well, my memory, so you have to so I encourage you guys as you watch the news, or if anything, hopefully nothing like this happens again. But while we were watching, like you said, in the wee hours of the night, somebody had a video footage, and it's interesting because you forget when you're watching the video that there's a cameraman behind that video. So what was the weirdest thing is at one point where Shaman comes in, there's a police officer in front of him in the video, so closer to the camera. And then the cameraman literally goes up the stairs. So you have to, like, this is the psyop, right? Piece of it. The cameraman goes backwards up the stairs. He's literally filming them coming up the stairs. So the cameraman leads them, and literally the cameraman is watching them come up, but he's ahead of them, right? Because he's coming up the stairs in front of them, and he lands in the hallway. And sure enough, there's all the his other buddies are there waiting in the hallway, like it was completely and absolutely orchestrated. Like, how did the cameraman know exactly where the officer and Shaman would go because they followed him up the stairs? I don't know. Anyway, I think we
No,
have
Ken.
to. Yeah,
I'm sorry, Jody, I thought you were done.
I'm done. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, Ken, the story you described about the overweight police officer holding back the crowd, is he the one who was given credit for steering the mob away from the room where the Senate was?
Yes, I believe so. Right. You watch that video, and people were coming to the conclusion and started talking online about he led them into the building, into that room that they were in. And then, yes, there was a narrative
It made
that
him a
came
hero.
out. Oh, he saved the life of all of Congress because he led them away from the chamber where they were hiding the Congress people. It's like, okay, good comeback. Yeah. Meanwhile, that kid drops his, whatever you call it, baton while he's running up the stair and everything. I don't even think he was a cop. I mean, if he was the poorest trained police officer ever. So why don't I go ahead? I'm going to stop our recording, and then I'll play this